everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I am your host, Jackie. And before I begin this episode, I feel it's important for me to offer a disclaimer. In this episode, I'll be using some stories, examples, client dynamics that I want to be clear have been altered, combined, or fictionalized in order to, they're based on real patterns that I see in my work as a therapist. But I want to be clear that no single story refers to any specific individual. And this is a good time for me to invite you, if you have not subscribed to the podcast or subscribed to the business social media channels, Healing Paths Recovery, please take a minute, do so. If you're watching the video on YouTube, hit the bell so that you're subscribed and you get notified when new content is released. And if you feel so inclined, I know it's hard for me to go on and leave reviews, although I do it because as a content creator myself, I understand how important those reviews, so I'm going to make a shameless ask for you to head over to Apple Podcasts, to head over to wherever you're listening to this episode and leave a 5-star review. Okay, let's get into today's episode. I wanted to record this episode and make it deeper than some of those articles or things that you'll see, like a list of nice things people do in relationships or how you know that they're the one. I've read those. Some of them are helpful, especially if the author of the article has talked to a licensed therapist. But I will say, for me, sometimes I read those lists and I will say, for me, when I'm reading those articles and I'm reading the list, there's some things that I would add that aren't on the list. So I wanted to record this podcast episode looking at green flags in relationships. Often we talk about red flags in relationships, and those are important to know. But let's talk about green flags in relationships. I will usually say green flags are patterns of behavior over time. We can't look at a green flag behavior in isolation because we might see it and it might not be accurate. It may not be part of a larger pattern, and that's significant. So these green flag patterns of behavior need to consistently create safety, security, trust, and then eventually love and shared meaning. These aren't personality traits, and they're certainly not romantic gestures. Instead, I think of green flag behaviors as relational capacities, skills that make someone able to build, sustain, and repair intimacy. We hear a lot these days about red flags, what to avoid, what to run from. And again, that has its place, and it's important to know red flags when it comes to relationships. But focusing exclusively on red flags doesn't teach us what to move toward. After working with hundreds of individuals and couples, I've seen a clear truth. Healthy relationships aren't discovered. They are created. And green flags are not magical traits that a partner has. They are patterns of behavior that two people co-create and reinforce as they build a secure relational foundation. Initially, we need to be clear that we have green flag behaviors, and then we are looking for that, and we trust that we will recognize it because we know it in ourselves, that we're going to recognize these green flag behaviors in others. And then when two people are capable of green flag behaviors and a pattern of relationship capabilities, they're going to be able to create and reinforce a secure relationship. Often what I hear from my clients who are dating, and I hear this from both my male and female clients, initially after a first date, even after a second date, all of these green flag behaviors are what they see as green flag behaviors. And I often have to tell them, anyone can show up well on a first date. Most people, when they're showing up on a first date, are trying to put their best foot forward. Sometimes I've heard horror stories that apparently the person they went on the date with didn't know that on a first date you should put your best foot forward. But that one's easy to eliminate from your options. In fact, many people can sustain good behaviors or idealized, what we would think of as these idealized behaviors for 6 weeks, even a few months. And the tricky part is that attraction happens fast. It's usually what gets somebody to engage with another person and even ask them for a date. Also, not only does attraction happen fast, but attachment happens fast. So it's important to know that chemistry or attraction is not a green flag. Some of my clients, if they are honest with me, which at the point we're working on dating and relationship skills, usually we have that working relationship where they can be honest and transparent. And they'll tell me, I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you, Jackie, that I think this person's really attractive and I want to go out with them. So we have a discussion, maybe multiple discussions about what attraction is, because I don't think attraction isn't important. I just think it doesn't really tell us if there's these patterns of relational capabilities. What we see initially is physical attractiveness. But attractiveness has to be broader than just what we can see in a person, because that doesn't tell us much. It tells us something about our arousal template, that we're attracted to them. But attraction can include intellectual attraction, emotional attraction, fun, novelty, security. All of those things need to be included in attraction. And yes, physical attraction is the first one that we get information about. I will also tell clients, who you choose to date or who you choose to get into a relationship deserves to know and feel that you are attracted to them. And you deserve that as well. So I'm not discounting the role that attraction plays. But that should not be the only thing that gets us into a relationship. What that means is chemistry is not a green flag. Charm is not a green flag. Emotional intensity, not a green flag. What we're looking for are patterns that predict future safety and stability. Patterns that remain consistent, not only during connection and fun. That's easy for somebody. We need these patterns that remain consistent, not only during connection and fun, but also during disappointment, during triggers, during stress, and during conflict. Let me say a little bit more about the fact that humans attach very fast and why that can put us at risk. Attachment is a biological mechanism. It's not a rational choice. Our nervous systems don't wait for a lot of data to determine if someone is safe. They attach as soon as we feel emotionally seen, desired, or soothed. That means you can attach to someone who is not good for you. You can attach before you have enough evidence to know their relational patterns. It also means that once attachment is activated, your brain begins to bond and downplay danger signs or red flag behaviors. This is especially risky if you come from an insecure attachment background, a chaotic or dysfunctional family, a neglectful family, and a disengaged and neglected family, or a past relationship that was toxic and emotionally abusive. I think it's also important to know that if you've recently gotten out of an unhealthy relationship, you need to be aware that your body is often starved for safety and validation. You are longing to be seen and known and accepted. And when someone comes along who is just simply kind and attentive or consistent, or initially consistent, it can feel like love. It can feel like safety. I have clients who I work with them through their divorce, and I'm pretty aware of their previous relationship. Not all the time, but that's not uncommon for me to have been in joint sessions with their now former spouse, or partner. Sometimes I'm the one that's brought to their attention the toxicity or the emotional, verbal, even physical abuse that they're experiencing that in their childhood was normalized. And I will often tell clients when they exit a relationship, it is important to be single for a period of time while you work on yourself and get yourself grounded and stable again. Reclaiming the parts of you that got lost in that relationship, envisioning parts of you that have never been developed, but you want to have developed in the next relationship or in a future relationship. After leaving unhealthy, dysfunctional, toxic relationships, many people unintentionally set the bar too low. It's understandable because those things weren't happening in their relationship. They'll say things like, this person listened to me. They don't yell at me. They actually follow through. They're really nice. And those can feel huge after chaos. But I want to be clear, these are not green flags. They're basic human requirements to be in any emotionally safe connection. That needs to be the new entrance for anybody to have access into your life, whether that's a friend or a romantic partner. So what is a green flag? A green flag is not a singular act or behavior. A green flag is a pattern of reliability, a pattern of their ability to emotionally regulate, a pattern of being willing to repair and take accountability, a pattern of respecting the pace that you are saying that you need, of respecting when you say no. And most importantly, respecting your individuality. Anyone can be nice, but consistency over time, especially under stress, is what tells you whether someone is emotionally healthy. Before I go further in this episode, I want to make this very important distinction. You can be in long-term marriages or committed relationships that currently carry unhealthy dynamics. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not irreparable. Many couples started relationships before they had any tools, before they knew anything about attachment wounds, and before they had language for trauma or emotional regulation. And the relationship became an extension of the baggage that they brought in. This does not mean automatically that you picked the wrong person. It doesn't mean that you should leave. And it can be healed. Relationships can become healthy, even deeply connected and intimate, if both people are doing their own individual work and then bringing that into the relational work. It was important for me when my kids were dating. I mean, they're still dating, most of them. I only have one of my 4 kids who is married. And I often have said, my kids and my spouse are really lucky that I became a therapist at such a young age. I graduated with my master's in social work when I was 25 years old and started working in the field and have worked in the field since then. And I think in many ways, because I was learning about those things so young, we were married. I think we were married less than a year when we moved across the country for me to go to grad school. And I think because I was learning about attachment wounds and learning about trauma and learning about emotional regulation, I think there were a lot of things that were avoided that that were avoided. And I'm not saying I didn't come into my marriage with baggage. I've talked before about my family of origin. So you know as well as I do that I came with baggage, but I was aware of that. And my husband and I had those conversations before we ever started talking about getting married. I think this is interesting. In my family of origin, there's six of us. All of the in-laws, so the people married into the family, met my dad. Except my oldest sibling, my older sister, she got divorced and remarried to her current husband, who is amazing and great, after our dad had passed away. And actually, not long before our mom passed away. But he was able to, see and interact with and get to know our mom before she passed away. But I will say, but for some of my siblings' spouses, they met my dad at the wedding. For some of them, he didn't come to the wedding because I don't know if I've talked about this, but when my parents got divorced, I was an adult. Me and my older sister were adults, and then the other four were not adults. My younger brother, so the third child, was older, still a teenager, still a minor, but older, maybe 16 or 17, I want to say. And our parents were separated for a year before they actually filed for divorce. There's a whole story that goes with why and how that came about that I'm not going to get into. I've often said before, and I heard from Patrick Carnes, he was talking about family of origins, and he was talking about his family of origin and the conversations he's had as adults with his siblings. One of the things I'll say about Patrick Carnes, I've done a lot of trainings with him. He's older now and not doing a lot of trainings anymore. And so I'm grateful that I was able to do some trainings when he was still older, but was still very sharp. And I will say, taking a training from him, learning from him, you get so much information. I just have to tell myself, I'm not going to retain everything he says. But what I've also learned is, because I've done some online training with him, even when we're on break, if people are up and gone to the restroom or whatever, as soon as the break starts, he'll keep talking just for a little bit after he says, okay, we're going to go on a break. Or sometimes when he's, presenting his material and teaching, he'll make a side comment and he just drops these truth bombs, drops these gems of wisdom. And that's not even what he's talking about. He just says it as a side comment. I write those things down, and sometimes I'm thinking about it for months or years. So this was one of those where he said something to the effect, I'm not going to quote him directly because I don't remember, but he said, in dysfunctional families, there's often one child who is the memory keeper. And I think he said the other siblings may have some memories, but there's one who has most of the memories. I would say in my family, that's me. And I have my theories as to why and how that came to be me, but that is me in my family of origin. And I've said to my siblings before, when we start talking about our family growing up, and some of them will say, I don't have a lot of memories. And I will say, I do. I have a lot of memories. And usually conversation just stops there. It was years before one of my siblings called me and said, what memories do you have? And I talked about those with them. And I think I've only had two siblings who ever asked me about those memories and have kept conversations going about that. So I don't know that it's a coincidence that my husband grew up just down the street from me, maybe six houses and on the other side of the street. So he knew my dad really before I knew him. And he tells this story about him and some other boys in the neighborhood throwing snowballs at cars, which we did back in the 70s. And It was later at night, I think, or I mean, it doesn't have to be later at night in the winter because it gets dark so early, but it was dark outside and they saw a car coming with the headlights on. They threw a snowball at it and the car slammed on the brakes and the person got out of the car and it was my dad. And he's like, we knew as soon as we could see the actual car that it was your dad. And we were so scared and we all ran to hide from him because he was scary. And he didn't really know my dad, but the boys knew that about him. Eventually, my husband and I became friends. Before we ever started dating, we became friends. And he came to my house. He was around and he saw things that also reinforced his opinion of my dad, that my dad was scary. He saw things about my mom. He saw things about my dad. And I think for me, being the memory keeper, that's been somewhat of a gift that he knows. And he had the worst of how physical, the worst of how violent things could get. But he saw some of it. He witnessed some of it and it shook him. And there were times when I'm trying to calm him down and say, it's not that bad, because that wasn't the worst. And he would just look at me and say, yes, it was. It was that bad. And so I think that's been, like I said, a gift. I don't know how else to describe it. I think it's been a gift that he has that knowledge for himself and he has seen those things. And he's the only one of the in-laws who actually witnessed the dysfunction in some of the dysfunction in my family. That was a little bit of a side tangent, but let me get back to what I was saying, that we're going to come into our adult relationships with baggage. My husband and I have had conversations and found the wording, because I think it takes time to find the wording for those experiences and those feelings. And we both agree that my family was overtly dysfunctional, but his family was very passively dysfunctional. And it took him longer to find that language and to really see the dysfunctional patterns. It's there, and both of us knew that when we were friends, and he brought that baggage in with him. They were very different types of baggage. I do think it's important to state that relationships that start off young, before we have language, before we have a lot of awareness of things, the baggage is going to come into the relationship and it's going to cause problems. But relationships can become healthy and deeply connected and deeply intimate if both people are doing their own individual work and that individual work shows up in the relational work. There are, however, situations where it may not be workable. These situations I would qualify as ongoing emotional or physical abuse. One partner refusing to ever take accountability or have personal insight, that makes it very difficult for the relationship and the baggage to improve. If one is manipulative, if there's coercive control, or if there's patterns of gaslighting that persist, that makes it very hard for the relationship to heal. If there is repeated betrayal without true repair and actually getting in to do the work, underlying betrayal, and if one or both are unwilling to grow, we're not going to see change. As I continue through this episode, I want you to listen through two lenses. I want you to listen through the lens of if you're single or dating or in a newish relationship. I want you to listen for the green flags to watch for over time in order to discern if these patterns are there. And then if you're married or you're in a long-term relationship, I want you to listen through that lens and look for the relational muscles that you and your partner can begin strengthening now, if there is mutual willingness. So now that we've established what a green flag truly is, this pattern of relational behavior that builds safety. If I had to choose one green flag that predicts long-term relational health more than almost anything else, it would be a consistent pattern of taking accountability for one's actions, impact, and emotional responses without collapsing into shame or shifting into blame. Now, as much as we might be healthy, we are human and we are going to be imperfect. So I am not talking about looking for a perfect person. And accountability is not about being perfect. It is about being willing to see yourself accurately and responsible for how you show up in a relationship. Without accountability, it's very difficult. Without accountability, we cannot repair. Without repair, you cannot build trust. And without trust, there is no real safety. There might be moments of temporary closeness, but that will evaporate under stress. When you're dating or you're in the early stages of building a connection, one of the clearest places accountability either shows up or doesn't is in the conversation about past relationships. Now, I haven't been on dates for a very long time, but I talk to people who are dating, and it seems common that at some point there's a conversation about previous relationships and why they didn't work. And I think it's fine if the person starts with how they were impacted by their ex, maybe about the betrayal, about the breach of trust, about the toxicness, the gaslighting, whatever that is, that's fine. But if they cannot also shift into what they did and how they impacted or showed up in the relationship, even if that sounds like, in my family of origin, this dynamic was pretty common, and I think that was normalized in our relationship. And so I would, if something, big happened, I would often disconnect, shut down, and then re-engage and pretend nothing happened. And I can see how over time that created bigger and bigger problems. Something like that is still accountability. But I think some of the red flags that you might hear is, my ex was just crazy. And that indicates I had nothing to do with that. Or I've talked to these people that when they come into therapy, and they were in an 18-year marriage. And they're like, yeah, they were just crazy. And if I ask, they'll usually tell me a couple of stories that, yeah, sound crazy. But then I'm like, how did you stay for 18 years? And you had 4 kids together? And some of them can then start to shift into their part. Others get very defensive and may not come back for the next session. I think another red flag sounds like everything was fine until she got controlling. They were a narcissist. That one is so common. That term is so thrown around. I wonder if everybody who goes through a divorce or a breakup believes that their ex was a narcissist. The numbers would not prove that out. A green flag might sound like, I was really shut down back then. I didn't know how to talk about my needs. I avoided conflict at all costs because I was scared of it, and that just created more problems. Looking back, I can see that I totally contributed to the disconnection in this way. It doesn't matter what happened in their past relationship, as much as it matters for you how they understand their role in it. Even if they were betrayed, cheated on, hurt, a healthy person can still say, here's who I was then, and here's how I've grown, or here's who I am today. This demonstrates emotional maturity, the capacity for introspection, a growth orientation, and lower likelihood of repeating these unconscious patterns because they are now conscious. I once worked with a man who had been divorced twice. And in both marriages, there had been a lot of conflict, resentment, and emotional distance. And when I asked about those relationships, he didn't talk about what his ex-wives did wrong. He said something to the effect of, in both marriages, I withdrew when things got hard. I thought if I stayed quiet, things wouldn't escalate. And now I realize that my silence was escalation. I wasn't participating in the relationship. That was my way of managing anxiety, but it created a lot of disconnection. And eventually, neither of us were happy. That's not them going into shame. That's accountability and it's insight. If we contrast this with someone who blames universally, never names their patterns, or sees themselves as the recurring victim of other people's dysfunction, that's a red flag. If someone cannot see their own part in past relationships, they are not going to be able to see their part in this one that you're getting into. And this is not just a red flag. It is a massive predictor of future breakdown. If you're 10, 20, or 30 years into a marriage and accountability has been missing, it doesn't automatically mean the marriage is unhealthy or hopeless. What matters is, can accountability start increasing from here going forward? Is each person willing to examine and name their part to their partner? Not just be aware of it and not say it out loud. Can there be movement toward mutual responsibility instead of defensiveness or blame? Green flag in long-term partnerships would sound like one partner says, "You're right, I can get dismissive when I feel overwhelmed. I don't want to shut you out. I'm working on pausing and staying present." An unworkable dynamic sounds like, "I wouldn't get mad if you didn't make me." Or, "This is just how I am. You're too sensitive. That's your issue, not mine." Accountability is the doorway to transformation. Without it, no amount of communication skills or date nights will make a relationship safe or functional. So we've established that accountability is the foundation on which all other green flags rest. Now let's move to the next essential green flag. One that shows up not in what your partner says, but how they respond to your emotional world. Green flag number 2 is emotional responsiveness and regulation. This is nervous system evidence of safety. If accountability is the foundation of relational health, emotional responsiveness is the nervous system evidence of safety. Emotional responsiveness means your partner is attuned to your emotional world and responds in a way that calms rather than escalates. This is not about agreeing with you or fixing your feelings. Instead, it's about staying present, caring about your experience, and co-regulating rather than dismissing, shaming, or withdrawing. The green flag patterns of emotional responsiveness look like when you express emotion, you can feel them lean in. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. They're with you. They're not trying to distance or put up a wall. They can reflect back understanding. That makes sense why you'd feel hurt. They remain emotionally regulated, even if you get dysregulated. And they seek connection in those moments, not control. They make space for your internal experience without making it about them. This green flag is backed by decades of attachment research. Emotionally responsive partners increase a sense of safety in the nervous system and lead to secure attachment over time. This comes from Dr. Sue Johnson's work and the Gottman Institute. Whereas lack of responsiveness predicts emotional distress, anxiety, and furthers attachment insecurity. In early relationships, the test here isn't really going to be tested by deep conflict yet, but you can observe it in micro interactions. Maybe you text something vulnerable and a responsive partner replies with care and presence. An unresponsive partner likes it, hearts it, ignores it, minimizes it. "Oh, I'm sure it's not that bad. You're going to be fine." or changes the subject. I'm really looking forward to our date this Friday. If you share something stressful about your day, that sounds really hard. Do you want to talk about it more? Whereas an unregulated partner is like, wow, that's intense. Anyway, if you set a boundary or you need space, or you say, hey, this is moving too fast for me. A responsive person would say, I respect that. And I'm happy to take things as slow as you need to. And if it feels like I'm going too fast, please let me know and I'll slow down. An unregulated person would say, why are you pulling away? Are you going to leave me? Did I do something wrong? Let me give you an anonymized example. I worked with a female client who would often feel overwhelmed after social events and sometimes needed just a quiet night to recharge. We talked about, yeah, this is very true for introverts. But her partner would respond by saying, thank you for telling me that that's what you need and that that's how you are, instead of just disappearing into silence. I like that you know your limits. And let me know if I can do anything while you're taking space. And we'll check in tomorrow. Now, this particular client had never experienced that kind of response before. She was used to guilt. She was used to either guilt trips or emotional withdrawal as a way of punishing her. The way this person responded, her partner, was a green flag. And not because it happened once, but because the person consistently responded with emotional safety. They remembered that this was a pattern that their partner needed. When they were very social, they needed a downtime. And they were consistent in how they read that. They didn't read that as a threat to their connection. The pattern over time is what created secure attachment in their relationship. A key part of responsiveness is regulation. Healthy partners can regulate their emotions during conflict. That doesn't mean they don't feel strong emotions. It means they don't discharge their anxiety through blame, yelling, stonewalling, or shutting down. We're not looking for someone who never gets upset, never gets triggered, never gets emotional. We're looking for somebody who knows how to self-soothe and stay relational. Green flag regulation behaviors look like taking a pause when feeling overwhelmed and also being able to circle back when you're regulated, naming your feelings instead of acting them out, and a willingness to return and repair. The red flag dysregulation patterns are explosive reactions, silent treatment, passive aggressiveness, intimidation, guilt, or control. Let's look at the long-term relationship perspective here. In an established marriage, emotional responsiveness can be developed. Many couples didn't learn emotional regulation in childhood, so they brought that into their adult relationship, and we should not be expecting perfection if they have not learned how to regulate, if they have not learned about emotional regulation and how to do it. So the question isn't, are they always regulated? The question would be, are they growing in their ability to self-regulate and respond with care instead of reactivity? When we talk about responsiveness versus reactivity, responsiveness is a relational skill. It's not a personality trait. It can be learned, practiced, and strengthened when both partners are willing. So now that we've established the importance of emotional regulation and responsiveness, let's move into a green flag that often goes unnoticed in the beginning, but it heavily predicts long-term health. And that's how a person responds to your bids for connection and whether they consistently turn toward you. Turning toward is green flag number 3. And these are small moments that build trust. It's how connection is built in micro moments. What is a bid for connection? In every relationship, whether it's new or it's long-term, we are constantly making small attempts to connect with the other person. These attempts for attention, affection, reassurance, support, or acknowledgement are called bids for connection. And this terminology comes from Doctors John and Julie Gottman. A bid for connection might sound like, oh, look at this meme. Guess what happened today? Can I get your opinion on something? Can also be nonverbal, a touch on the arm, or a glance across the room where both people make eye contact. And in the Gottman's research, they are very clear. These are not trivial, even though they are small. They are actually the building blocks of relational connection. The Gottman's research shows that in healthy, long-lasting relationships, partners turn toward bids up to 86% of the time. In distressed relationships, that number drops catastrophically low. Turning toward is a pattern of responsiveness that communicates, I see you, I hear you, you matter to me. Years ago, I took the first level of the Gottman training. I think I've completed the first 3 levels, and now they've added a 4th, but that I have not done. And in their trainings, they often show videos of couples that they have filmed and studied from what they call their love lab. John Gottman was talking about these bids for connection, and he showed an example of this couple. So they have this love lab, that's what they call it, up in the Seattle area overlooking the Puget Sound. And they have couples come for a weekend. I think it's a weekend, maybe it's longer. And they study them. They do blood tests, they do heart monitors, I think pupil dilation. I don't remember everything that they do, but they are not just observing them on video camera, they're also taking biological measures. And so he shows this video, he's talking about bids for connection, and he shows this video, and I think it's the wife who's looking out the window over the Puget Sound, and the husband's sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and I think a newspaper. And the wife says, "Oh, wow, that's a beautiful sailboat." And the husband says, Now, to be clear, the husband did not turn around. He didn't walk over to see the beautiful sailboat. He didn't really look up from his newspaper. So John stops the video at this point and says, "Did you see that?" And we're watching this thinking, see what? We saw what was on there, but what exactly were we supposed to see? And he said, "Did you hear that grunt from the husband?" "Yeah, we heard that." And he said, "That's a bid for connection." She was talking, not necessarily trying to engage him. He said, a bid for connection doesn't have to be an enthusiastic response. Although had the husband stood up, walked over and said, "Oh, wow, that is a really beautiful sailboat," that would still count. But even his grunt of interest, like, counted as a bid for connection. So when he talks about these are small, somewhat trivial things, that's what he's talking about. But again, in healthy or long-lasting relationships, his research found that partners turn toward bids up to 86% of the time. Examples of turning toward, like I said, a grunt, but maybe the partner says, "Oh, wow, that sunset is so pretty." And the other partner looks and says, "Oh, wow, it really is. I love how the light hits the mountains." Or a partner says, "I had a hard day." And their partner says, "Tell me about your day." Examples of turning away include no response, just silence, minimizing. That's not that great. So again, if we're taking this couple in the love lab as an example where she says, "Oh, that sailboat is so beautiful." And he stands up, walks over to the window and says, "It's not that great." That would not be a bid for connection. Even though he stood up, he walked over, he looked, he minimized or dismissed her opinion about it. It can be ignoring or changing the subject. The Gottmans also talk about turning against, which they would say are definitely red flag behaviors. Examples of turning against is when the partner makes it personal. You're so dramatic. Why do you always complain? Things like that are going to be turning against. So in early dating, turning toward may show up as responding attentively to texts. Maybe not perfectly, but with emotional presence. This isn't about how quickly you respond, but it is responding when you have the time to sit down and bring your attention to what they're saying and respond. It would be showing curiosity about following up on something that you said earlier and remembering details about your life that you've shared. Turning toward is not big romantic gestures. It's about consistent small acts of emotional presence. And this particular green flag of turning towards signals that your partner is engaging with your inner world. And that's a critical part of emotional safety. In long-term relationships, turning toward becomes even more important over time because life gets busy. And we know each other pretty well. Careers, kids, stress, aging parents, these can shift emotional energy away from the relationship. In unhealthy relationships, the individuals stop turning towards each other. They stop noticing. They stop responding to bids. And over time, disconnection becomes the norm. In healthy relationships, the couple still maintains these micro rituals of connection. They stay curious about each other. They continue turning toward even when life is busy. And again, this isn't about being perfect because none of us are. It's about pattern recognition. Does the default response over time communicate, I care or I'm unavailable? We also know that turning toward predicts whether we can build trust, or trust isn't built because you believe your partner loves you. Trust is built because over hundreds of repeated interactions, you experience them turning toward your needs, emotions, and attempts for connection. And this consistency tells your nervous system, I'm not alone in this relationship. When I reach out, I am met, and connection is safe. This is what allows the relationship to move from early safety into deep security. So we've covered the green flags of accountability, responsiveness, and turning toward. 3 green flags that form the relational foundation. Now I'm going to turn to a green flag that determines whether a relationship can withstand conflict, and that's stress and rupture and the ability to repair. So green flag number 4 is repair attempts. And this is how couples heal and build unbreakable trust over time. Every healthy relationship has conflict. And every emotionally bonded couple will trigger each other. You will misunderstand each other. You'll get it wrong. You'll hurt each other. Not because you don't love or trust or feel safe with each other, but because intimacy exposes our attachment histories. What separates healthy relationships from unhealthy ones is not the absence of rupture. It is the presence of effective repair. And again, I'm going to go back to research done by Dr. John Gottman that shows that the success or failure of repair attempts is one of the greatest predictors of whether a relationship will last. In fact, he says that repair matters even more than conflict. So what is a repair attempt? A repair attempt is any effort made to reduce tension, to reconnect, to acknowledge the impact, and to restore emotional safety after a rupture. It may sound like, hey, I didn't like how that conversation went. Can we try again? Or I got defensive earlier and I can see that. I'm sorry for shutting you down. Or we might notice and say, hey, I care about you more than I care about winning this argument. Sometimes even a gentle touch or a small joke that is not at the other person's expense can be a repair attempt if it respects the emotional moment and lands for the partner. Years ago, my husband, I used to get frustrated with him. He would also say that he was never going to be like me. And I feel like this is maybe mom stuff where as you're moving around the house and your kids are younger, they'll lose things. And they could come to me and say, Mom, where are my shoes? And I'm like, oh, they're downstairs next to the couch, but not on the side that's open in between the other love seat that's there. And my husband would be like, how do you know that? And I don't know. I was all over the house all the time and noting where things were. He may say, I can't find my keys. And I'm like, oh, they're in your closet. I would say, oh, they're in your closet next to your socks. And he would say, why are they in the closet? And I'm like, I don't know. They just are. You put them there. I don't know. And so sometimes, I would ask him, hey, could you go downstairs? So in our basement, we had this little storage area. I don't know how common that is in other states. I know in some states they don't have basements, but it is a big thing in Utah. And we had storage space. We actually, in our old house, we had a lot of storage space. And so in this one, we had food that, I would use, but we always had extra. I was never going to run out. That's a whole different story. And so I would say, hey, could you go downstairs and get me a can of whatever? And he would come back up and say, we don't have any. And I would say, yes, we do. It's down and it's next to this. If you walk in the door and you go to the left, then it's right there on the third shelf down. And he would go back downstairs and he'd come up and say, no, we don't have any. And so then I would go down and I'd get it right where I was telling him that it was. And then I would come back up and he'd be like, well, where'd you find that? And I would say, right where I told you it was. And so that was annoying to me after a while. And one of the times this happened, I think I gave him a look that I just was annoyed. I didn't mean to give him that look, but it was annoying to me because I'm in the middle of fixing dinner and now I have to go downstairs and get this thing. And so I just looked at him like, seriously? And instead of fighting, which it's not like we haven't fought, but instead of fighting, I just looked at him and I said, you know what? It's a good thing you're good looking because you are not a good looker. And I went down and I got it. And that's become a joke between the two of us, an inside joke between the two of us. That sometimes if he cannot find something and it's inconveniencing me, I have to stop what I'm doing, get up and go get it. He might say, it's a good thing I'm good looking though, right? And we'll both laugh. It makes it lighter. I don't have to be so annoyed. And it's a way of addressing what was making me annoyed without doing any damage. What's important with repair attempts is that the repair attempt is made and it is received. One of the red flags with this green flag, does that make sense? Is that one or both partners refuse repair and they escalate further, or they're punishing with silence, or they use repair as manipulation. They also apologize, but there's no accountability on their side. They're apologizing for how you made them feel. What successful repair tells us is that when a partner is willing to repair after conflict, it demonstrates emotional maturity, care for connection over their own ego, a capacity to emotionally regulate, and respect for your emotional reality. When you see repair happen consistently over time, it tells your nervous system this relationship can handle imperfection, which again is good because both people are going to be imperfect. But what it's saying is we don't have to be perfect in order to be safe and secure. And this is actually what builds true security, that knowledge that I am accepted and loved in my imperfection. In long-term relationships, repair can be transformational. Many couples that I work with enter therapy in a great deal of stress and despair because they believe their conflict means failure. And often they're starting to work with me when one doesn't know how much longer they can hold on because the conflict is so big. But the truth is, conflict is where intimacy can deepen if repair is present. Repair is how you build resilience into the relationship. A healthy couple isn't one that never falls out of sync, but it is one that recognizes when we feel out of sync and constantly returns and learns from each return. The way we would see green flag progression in long-term relationships would be that accountability starts to acknowledge the awareness of the impact instead of getting defensive when you see your partner's impact because of your rage or whatever. Responsiveness starts to look like emotional attunement, that we can tell how our partner is feeling and we respond to that in ways that support the relationship. Turning toward starts to look like we stay connected and we don't have long periods of disconnection. And repair starts to look like restoring and strengthening the bond in the relationship. With consistent repair, ruptures become opportunities for deeper connection, not signs of relational decay. And I want to make a note here for listeners with attachment wounds. If you didn't grow up seeing repair, if the ruptures were ignored or minimized, punished, or met with rage, your nervous system may interpret conflict as danger or abandonment. Learning to both offer and receive repair is one of the deepest forms of healing your attachment trauma. So now that we've explored the internal repair system of a relationship, we're ready to look at a green flag that is often underestimated. But again, it's one of the strongest predictors of secure attachment over time. And that's consistency and follow through. So green flag number 5 here is consistency and follow through. Consistency isn't romantic, but it is regulating. Consistency tells your nervous system what to expect. And when your nervous system knows what to expect, it stops scanning for danger and can start relaxing into connection. Green flags live in predictability. Not predictability in the sense of boredom, but predictability in the sense of emotional safety. And this is how a relationship transitions from safety and security into trust. I think it's important to say that consistency isn't about someone not making mistakes or missing a text. It's about patterned reliability. It means, generally speaking, they do what they say they will do. If their plans change, they communicate that. Their emotional responses match the situation. They don't disappear when things get uncomfortable. They follow up on conversations, show up when promised, and maintain a stable emotional presence. Consistency builds attachment security, whereas inconsistency activates attachment anxiety. If early on you are already feeling anxious because you don't know if they'll show up, or you're constantly trying to interpret their behavior, that's not actually just your attachment issue. It's likely a relational inconsistency issue. I had a client who once told me, I don't know if I'm crazy or if this relationship is making me crazy. One day they're all in, texting me sweet things, talking about our future. Then 2 days go by with silence and I don't hear from them. And then they're back again and it's intense. In this case, the person would not be crazy. They're in a relationship that activated a constant state of hypervigilance because there was no consistency. There was also no explaining, hey, I've got this busy project. I don't know how communicative I'll be for the next 2 days. Or when they re-engaged, there wasn't an acknowledgement of their disengagement. In relationships, green flags reduce anxiety over time. Whereas in red flag relationships, they intensify or create anxiety over time. So what does this green flag of consistency look like in long-term relationships? In established marriages, consistency can erode under stress. Work hours increase, emotional attention decreases. Routine starts to take over intentional connection. So in long-term relationships, the green flags look like the partner recognizing disconnection and initiating reconnection. Or if you recognize disconnection and point it out, they will respond and reconnect. They start to maintain rituals. Maybe it's a weekly check-in, a Sunday walk, an evening debrief. They proactively nurture the bond instead of assuming it will just maintain itself. And again, consistency is not about perfection. It's about intentional reliability. We can't be reliable unintentionally. It does take some awareness and consciousness. And we know that trust isn't built by grand declarations. We build trust by showing up in small moments over and over again. It's also important to distinguish the difference between consistency and intensity. And this is a key distinction. Intensity can feel like closeness because it's very stimulating, whereas consistency creates closeness because it's regulating and feels safe. The closeness or what's happening during the connection can still feel very powerful. But at the core, it's about consistency, not intensity. We know that intensity is episodic and it's often emotionally driven, whereas connection is patterned and rooted in intention and awareness. If somebody is intensely loving for a day and then distant for 3, that's not really connection. That's emotional whiplash. Unless they're communicating, hey, I have my kids this weekend and we're going to be busy. I don't know how much I'll be able to reach out. In that situation, we should be able to entertain ourselves, be on our own, do what we do when we have time for autonomy. Healthy love is slow, it's steady, and it's deep. It grows like roots, not fireworks. Consistency and follow through naturally lead us into the next major green flag, and that's respecting boundaries and pace. Because true safety in a relationship includes the freedom to move at a pace that honors both people's nervous systems, responsibilities, and individuality. So boundary respect is a critical green flag, and it's green flag number 6. Healthy relationships honor 2 truths at once: connection and autonomy or individuality. A green flag is not just that someone wants a relationship with you. It's that they respect the boundaries required for that relationship to be healthy. I've had several clients who date, and some of the feedback that they'll get, I think this is more true for my male clients, that they get this feedback. And I think there are some gender differences why they tend to get the feedback more than my female clients who are dating. But I think it is important for both males and females. So sometimes in therapy, we have worked on them building a life of meaning when they're single for themselves. They have a life of meaning. They've refigured out interests, hobbies, things that they like to do when they've got free time. They have friends that they can do things with or that they make phone calls with and connect with. One of the ways they hear this feedback is how attractive it is that you have a life. And I think what the women they're dating are trying to express is you're not just having this life where you're looking for a woman to come in and complete it. Sometimes they'll say, yeah, I got home from work and I was talking with them on the phone and I was making myself dinner. And they were like, oh, what are you making for dinner? And they're talking about, oh, I got this grilling and I'm making some vegetables or I'm making a salad. And the women are surprised that on their own, when they're cooking for themselves, A, they're cooking for themselves. B, they're eating vegetables. I think it's a sign of maturity that, yes, they're adults, but they're actually mature adults, not little boys. I had a female client who was dating somebody, and she came into one session. They were early dating. She hadn't been to his place before, but he came to her place and noticed that she had a vacuum. And he said, oh, would you mind if I borrowed your vacuum? And she said, you don't have a vacuum? And he said, no, I don't have a vacuum. And she came into the session and she was telling me about it. She was saying, I think that's a deal breaker for me. But it seems like a small thing that she hadn't known until that moment. And she said, Jackie, he's been single for 3 years. How does he not have a vacuum? And, I responded, oh, yeah, that's kind of a big deal. And she said, I don't want somebody who's waiting for me to come into their life and make it better because I have a vacuum. So, needless to say, she stopped dating that person. So I think it's important that when you have autonomy, when you have moments of autonomy, that it's actually something that fulfills you as an individual, not trying to white knuckle through until you can connect again. When we're talking about boundaries, it's important to say that boundaries are not walls that keep a person out or that keep love out. Instead, they're containers that protect love, safety, emotional regulation, and individuality. If someone claims to love you but disregards your boundaries, we should be questioning if they actually love you, or instead they just love access to you. One of the most important overlooked green flags that I hear about is a partner who can match the pace that you have communicated. For example, you might say, I really like you, but I need to take this slowly. A green flag response looks like, thanks for telling me that. I want us to build something that feels right for both of us. And that is a wise thing to do, so there's no rush. Whereas a red flag response may sound like, why? I don't understand why we can't just be together all the time. If you really cared about me, you wouldn't need space. Pressure is not commitment. Respect for the pace that you need is commitment. And when someone respects your pace, they are demonstrating emotional regulation, secure attachment, and long-term thinking. They're not pressuring you to move in right away, to spend all your time with them, to meet your kids too soon, to come to your family activities. Some people, especially those with anxious attachment styles, perceive boundaries as emotional rejection. They may say, but why do you need time alone? Are you losing interest? Why can't we just move in together already? Or why can't we just have sex already? Why do you need a night to yourself? These aren't signs of closeness or healthy signs about the level of connection in the relationship. They're actually signs of dysregulation. Green flag behaviors see your boundaries as information, not a threat. They show curiosity instead of defensiveness. And they understand that healthy relationships make room for both connection and autonomy. Secure partners want you to be a whole person, not an emotional service provider. When a partner has a healthy life, which is one of the most underrated green flags, it's a life that they enjoy. It includes friends and hobbies and passions and the ability to have solitude. Now, they still may want a partner in their life, and they make space for the relationship, but they're not going to just consume it or burn through it very quickly. This actually indicates emotional maturity, a secure attachment in which they can navigate both autonomy and connection. It's a sign of self-regulation and the ability to experience love without codependency or enmeshment. A green flag may sound like, I love spending time with you. I also value the things that make me me. And I want both in my life. Sometimes I have clients who are probably dating too soon after getting out of a relationship or post-divorce. And they're not on solid ground yet, and they don't have a life that has meaning and enjoyment for themselves. But they still need to move slowly, and they know that, and they communicate that. So that may sound like, I love spending time with you, and I look forward to when we spend time together. But I have a lot to work on. And some of that work can only be done when I'm on my own. You might add, that doesn't mean I don't enjoy spending time with you or I'm looking for somebody else. It simply means that I have work still to do. And I need to do that. And some of that requires me to have time on my own. So what does autonomy look like in long-term relationships? In a long-term relationship, boundary work often becomes a central part of healing, or it's a central part of a healthy relationship. Couples who have been stuck in cycles of conflict often will realize that they've been overrun by enmeshment or avoidance. Healing in long-term relationships looks like reclaiming healthy individuality, being a person outside of the roles you play, spouse, mother, father, respecting rest and solitude, or social time, connecting with friends. It looks like taking responsibility for your own emotional regulation instead of outsourcing it to your partner. Many couples who are experiencing disconnection and conflict in their relationship actually become closer when they reestablish healthy boundaries, because the relationship shifts from a place of pressure to a place of chosen connection or intentional connection. So now we're ready to enter this final foundational relational green flag that determines whether a relationship can go the distance. And that's the ability to grow, receive feedback, and co-create shared meaning. So green flag number 7 is a growth mindset, the ability to give and receive feedback, and mutual healing. There is a cultural myth that healthy relationships are about finding the right person, as though compatibility is a magical alignment that simply happens when we find the right person. But in secure functioning relationships, even if it started there, that doesn't last long term. It's not sustainable. Healthy relationships are not found. They are created through mutual willingness to grow, self-reflect, and change in response to each other's needs. I often told my kids when they were teenagers and started dating, or I even tell them now because 3 of them are not married and they're still dating. I think our kids know that there's some of the few out there whose parents have a good relationship and friendship. And so I will tell them, like, look, who you see us as adults, which they may have a different viewpoint of us when they were younger and we were younger than they do today when they're more aware of relationships. So I tell them who we are today is not who we were when we started our relationship. This is decades of growth on both of our parts, maturing, and creating a relationship that works well for us. I think knowing that healthy relationships are not just found, that we don't just accidentally stumble into one, or that we have this cosmic connection that is so powerful, it just creates its own healthy relationship on its own. A green flag here looks like, does this person demonstrate a growth mindset? And are you also committed to growth? So let's talk about receiving feedback without defensiveness. A true green flag is not that someone never hurt you. It's that when you bring something up, they're able to, maybe not perfectly, maybe not the first time, but they are consistent and can stay regulated enough to listen, to reflect on their impact in this situation, and to make an adjustment that develops over time. And it's not because they're being controlled. They do have a choice in this. These changes are made because they care about how their behavior affects you. Green flag phrases sound like, I didn't realize that landed that way. Thank you for telling me, and let me clarify what I was trying to say. Oh, that wasn't my intention, but I can understand why it hurt. I care about you, so I want to work on this. Red flag phrases sound like, that's not what happened. I didn't say that. Or you're overreacting. Stop making a big deal out of everything. This is just how I am. You knew that when you met me. A relationship where feedback is welcomed, not feared, and is seen as an opportunity for growth is a relationship that will continue to evolve. This episode isn't just about evaluating other people. It's also about holding the mirror up to ourselves. You cannot receive the benefits of a secure relationship if you are unwilling to grow, if you won't take accountability, and if you can't learn to regulate your own emotional responses. Healthy relationships require the ability to receive feedback without immediate defense or collapsing into shame. They require a willingness to work on your patterns instead of expecting your partner to just learn to tolerate them. There's a recognition that your triggers are your responsibility, even if your partner supports you in healing them. Years ago, I was telling my husband, because it was not uncommon when he's working, he tends to be busy. And so he learned when he's at work, if he thought of something he wanted to share with me or something he wanted to circle back to, he would send me a text that said, hey, let's talk tonight. Now, normally, that's not a bad thing to say. He's busy. He's going to forget by the time he gets home from work. Or he might say, oh, I had something to talk to you about. But for me, that's not how I received it. I received it like I was in trouble. You may have heard me talk about how adults don't get in trouble. That is something I personally had to learn for myself, as well as to teach clients that adults don't get in trouble. But that's how I felt. And one of the times I said to him, hey, when you send me that text, I don't know why, but it makes me feel like I'm in trouble and like I just got called to the principal's office. And he said, oh, yeah, that makes sense. You did get called to the principal's office. And you did get in trouble a lot at home. And I was like, yeah, right. I panic. When I get that text, I panic. And he did ask me, has it ever meant that I was mad at you or that you were in trouble? And I said, no. But still, that is my first reaction to that. And so if you could just try to say it different, like I want to share something with you tonight, even feels better than let's talk tonight. And so he said he was willing to try to work on that and to change how he said that. And he did for the most part. And maybe another, I don't know, 6, 7 years goes by. And he defaulted back into texting me, let's talk tonight. And I brought it up one night and I said, hey, remember this conversation? It happened a long time ago. But you started sending me quick texts saying, let's talk tonight. And it still triggers that same response in me. And he said, I remember the conversation. He said, I wasn't even aware that I had started to use that wording again. And he said, but Jackie, how many years have passed since we had that conversation? And I said, I don't know, maybe 7, 8, I don't know. And he said, so maybe could you just update and know that when I text that, that does not mean that you're in trouble or I'm mad at you? And I said, yeah, that's fair. Yes, I need to update my nervous system so that it doesn't mean that when you say that, because it's never meant that when you text me that. So that feedback was fair and I could receive it. And we had evolved since the initial time that I brought it up. And it was my trigger and I was responsible for it. I don't think it was wrong to ask him to support me with that. But eventually, when he started using it again, yeah, it's fair that he's like, can the trigger evolve a little bit? Yes, yes, it can. So instead of it being about needing to be perfect or never getting triggered, it's about self-honesty, a growth orientation, and a willingness to disrupt inherited or ingrained patterns. In long-term marriages, this is often a major turning point. Couples who begin therapy often say, we've been having the same fight for 10 years. This often means neither partner has been willing to actually integrate feedback, or they're reading this feedback as danger. And I find that as I work with them, and both people can start to take some radical responsibility for their own regulation, for their own triggers and their own healing, and their own imperfections, this conflict starts to transform into growth. The past pain becomes shared meaning, and the relationship becomes a secure base for both people to evolve. The green flag for established relationships sounds like both partners saying, I'm willing to do my part and I'm willing to look at myself. When accountability, emotional regulation, turning toward, repair, consistency, boundaries, and mutual growth are present, something powerful begins to happen in the relationship. Love is no longer just a feeling. It becomes a shared creation. And that's where we see the final and the most important green flags start to emerge. And that's the development of shared meaning and partnership vision, which is green flag number 8. At the top of the Gottman Institute's Sound Relationship House diagram, and at the heart of secure functioning relationships, is the creation of shared meaning. Shared meaning is what happens when two people are not just in a relationship, they are actively creating a life, a story, and a purpose together. This goes beyond compatibility, it goes beyond love, and it goes beyond friendship and liking each other. It is about co-authoring a narrative that both people find fulfilling and safe to be part of and belong to. Shared meaning looks like you have personal goals and you have shared goals. We start to see we language, not as a fusion of identities, but as a partnership identity. The couple has rituals, however small, that reinforce your connectedness. You see yourselves as a team facing life together rather than two individuals negotiating selfish needs. Examples of shared meaning. Sunday morning is the coffee and walk ritual. There's a consistent debrief of the day before going to bed. Vacations are a priority because they represent rest and connection for the couple. To be clear, that's a vacation for just the couple. Otherwise, I've always joked that if you take the kids, it's a trip. And usually after a trip, you need a vacation. The couple starts to view challenges as something they get through as a team. These examples of shared meaning, these moments of shared meaning, they're not just routines. They are rituals. They're rituals of connection. Shared meaning is what gives the relationship resilience during hard seasons, direction during uncertainty, purpose beyond just the logistics, and an identity beyond roles. When a couple is at a place of creating shared meaning, they're creating something bigger than who or what they would be as an individual. And when life gets hard, there's grief, there's illness, financial stress, Shared meaning is the glue that holds the relationship steady. Without shared meaning, partners start to drift. Resentment can grow. Entitlement can grow. And individual survival starts to replace relational connection. When we have shared meaning, the challenges of life become bonding opportunities rather than threats. The relationship becomes a place of emotional grounding, not emotional instability. Even if you didn't start with a shared vision and you're 10, 15, 30 years into a relationship, you can still build one. Partners who say, let's talk about where we want to be in the next 5 years, or what do we want our life to feel like in this next chapter? How do we want to navigate aging, retirement, adult children, grandchildren, or illness together? Navigating conversations about aging, about retirement, about illnesses as we get older. Those aren't fun conversations to have. I think they're necessary conversations to have. And it's a red flag when one or both partners refuse to engage in future building conversations or dismiss shared meaning as not important. A relationship with no shared meaning is a relationship without direction. And a lack of direction will often breed insecurity. Healthy shared meaning creates attachment security because it tells our nervous system that we're building something together, that there is a future here that is stable and predictable. We're not just reacting to life as individuals. Instead, we're moving through life as a connected unit. So I think this is the final green flag because it is the outcome of all of the others. Accountability builds trust. Responsiveness reinforces safety. Turning towards deepens emotional connection. Repair builds resilience. Consistency creates stability. Boundaries protect individuality. A growth orientation ensures there's evolution and continued growth and healing and change. And shared meaning turns all of these elements into a lasting, secure bond. So now that we've talked through all of the core patterns of green flags, I think there's one more thing to address. And that's a common mistake that keeps so many people stuck in anxiety or confusion. Not all of the behaviors we've been told are proof of love actually matter. Some of them may be cultural rituals, and that's fine, but there's not statistical or relational significance to them. And this brings me into the next chapter. The difference between meaningful green flags and not as meaningful or even meaningless surface behaviors that can be misinterpreted or overinterpreted. So let's talk about green flags versus false positives. What doesn't actually predict a healthy relationship that maybe some people put too much emphasis on? When people come out of dysfunctional families or toxic relationships, they often evaluate relationships based on symbols of love rather than patterns of safety. They latch onto small gestures and try to create certainty from them. But behavior is only meaningful when it is part of a consistent relational pattern. Without the pattern, it's just data with no context. Some common false positives that are mistaken for green flags, but have no proven predictive value on their own, can include saying I love you every night before bed, texting good morning and good night, social media posts declaring affection. In fact, often I see those posts and think, oh, there's a problem. Somebody had an affair is often what I think, but that's me. Using certain emojis or punctuation, saying I love you versus love you, fast declarations of soul connection or fate, wanting to spend all of our free time together. and sexual intensity and chemistry. I can understand that these things can feel emotionally activating. But emotional activation is not the same thing as emotional safety. If tiny changes in language send your nervous system into panic, this is not evidence of your partner's instability. It's evidence of your own unhealed attachment system. And while I can get that if there is this unhealed attachment system and we start to feel that this person actually loves me in a way that I've never felt loved, we want to control that because the last thing we want to do is lose it. Controlling it is not a guarantee that we're going to keep it. Healthy relationships require us not only to evaluate others, but to regulate ourselves and build tolerance for relational nuance. This is why what people say are green flags are actually low bar requirements. If you've been mistreated in relationships, you may find yourself saying things like, oh, this person didn't yell at me. Oh, this person asked how my day was. Oh, I told them I was sad and they listened to me and asked what that was about. These aren't necessarily green flags. I mean, they're good things, but they should be baseline requirements for functioning adults to be in a relationship. It's not evidence of this other person scaling this very high bar. Let's be very clear. Someone listening to you, speaking kindly to you, and not screaming at you is not exceptional. It is expected. The fact that it feels exceptional speaks more to your past experiences than it does to this person's suitability as a lifelong partner. Instead of asking, do they say or do the right romantic things? Ask, is there a consistent pattern over time of safety, accountability, responsiveness, reliability, repair, respect for my boundaries, mutual growth, and shared meaning? And again, there might be things that you do that trigger them, so we might need to throw those in there too. Sometimes do they disconnect because you've yelled at them? But you can predict that 2 days later, they're going to show back up and say, hey, can we talk about this? These things are what predicts future secure attachment. Not how loudly they proclaim love, but how consistently they demonstrate care for the relationship. Now that we've separated meaningful green flags from false positives, it's time to look at what it means to actually build these patterns. Whether you're entering a new relationship or transforming a long-term one. Because green flags aren't traits that you find. They are patterns that are co-created together. A major misconception is that green flags are checkboxes that you verify about someone else. In reality, green flags are the relational patterns that two people actively co-create. This means you can't just observe green flags, but you have to participate in creating and building the pattern of them. You're not a passive recipient of love. You instead are a co-architect of emotional safety. To attract and sustain healthy relationship patterns, you must also embody them. And whether you are single, dating, or in a long-term partnership, here are some core practices to begin today. Start practicing accountability. Instead of explaining or defending, practice acknowledging the impact your partner expressed. Start today to strengthen emotional regulation. Take space when you need it, not to punish, but to stay relational. That might sound like saying, I'm feeling overwhelmed and I want to stay connected in this conversation, but I'm going to need a moment to regulate. Start noticing and turning toward bids for connection. Initiate and receive repair attempts. Practice saying, I care about this relationship more than I care about being right. Can we try again? Start to create reliability in your own behavior. Follow through, manage your commitments, and be who you say you are. Respect boundaries, both yours and your partner's. Healthy love honors individuality. It allows space for the me within the we. Maintain a growth mindset. Instead of fearing feedback, set it as an invitation to evolve and to grow. Participate in shared meaning. Don't wait for a relationship to give you purpose. Co-create it. For those in established relationships, transformation is absolutely possible if there is mutual willingness. Things to look for as green flags of growth include increased emotional awareness, a willingness to own patterns without blame, openness to feedback, new rituals of connection that are being initiated, and a trajectory towards safety and security. Now, for some couples that I have worked with or I'm working with, there's still a lot of individual work and healing for them to do. And when I talk with them, I will say, look, healing is painful. We can't just see the tip of the iceberg around a wound and choose not to see anymore and expect change. We have to see it all, which is what is very painful, before we're able to make changes in ourselves. Healing in long-term relationships is not instant. It is directional. Look for movements and improvements and growth, not perfection. Healthy relationships are not effortless. They are intentional. And healing is not passive. It is a choice that you make repeatedly. You're not looking for someone who makes you feel good in every moment. You're looking for someone who is safe to heal with, safe to grow with, safe to build a future with. As we wrap up, I want to remind you that healthy relationships do not feel like intensity. They feel like clarity. They feel like exhaling. It's a feeling of, I don't have to perform to be loved. I don't have to be perfect to be accepted. They feel like slow building trust, something your nervous system can recognize and rest into. Love is not proven in grand gestures. It is demonstrated in consistent patterns. And we all deserve consistency. You deserve safety. You deserve a love that builds you, not a love that destabilizes you. If you have left a toxic or dysfunctional relationship and you find yourself unsure of what's real or healthy, please know this: you are not broken. Your attachment instincts can be recalibrated. You can learn what safe love feels like. You can become a safer partner. You can create, participate in, and sustain the kind of relationship that fosters healing, stability, and growth. Thank you for joining me today. If this episode brought clarity, please share it with someone who is navigating relationships and might be questioning their instincts. These conversations can change the way that we show up for love, not because we're looking for the perfect person, but because we're learning what it truly means to build healthy love. Remember, safety is not a feeling that you chase. It is a pattern that you build. At the end of this episode, I want to remind you that your story matters. Remember, there's something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.